Samuel was born beneath a sky that did not promise him anything, not even the right to his own breath. Alabama soil was the first thing he felt on his skin, warm and heavy, the same way life would always feel for him. They said he came into the world silent, eyes wide open, staring as if he already knew the fight he was about to live. From the beginning, the elders whispered that something burned behind those eyes, something dangerous, something that could not be chained even if his body could. By the age of 9, he was already taller than most boys his age, strong in a way that frightened the overseers. But it was not his height or strength that made them watch him. It was the way he listened, the way he memorized every detail, the way he did not break, not even under a whip that turned his skin into a map of scars. They feared a boy who could suffer and still stand straight. They feared a boy who did not cry. But most of all, they feared the way he looked at the horizon. Samuel grew up on the Grayson plantation, a place where cruelty was as common as the dust in the fields. White columns at the front of the house disguised the ugliness behind it. Children learned early that hope was a dangerous thing, something you had to hide like a weapon, but Samuel didn't hide his. He carried it openly, silently, like a flame he dared anyone to blow out. By 14, he was already planning his first escape, not because he believed freedom was possible yet, but because he needed to understand what walls he was fighting. Everything in his life became preparation. He watched the changing of the overseers' schedules. He learned how fast a man fell asleep after whiskey. He learned which dogs were lazy, which were vicious, and which could be tricked with a scrap of salted meat. He studied the stars like they were maps only he could read. And then, one night, while the moon hung low over the pines, he made his first run. He didn't make it far. The dogs caught him by sunrise. They dragged him back with his ankles bleeding and his lungs burning. The overseer beat him until even the other enslaved people turned their faces away because some pain was too much to witness. When it was over, they left him in the dirt, swollen and barely breathing. Everyone thought that beating would break him. It didn't. If anything, it fed him. Samuel walked again 2 days later, limping but determined. He went back to work with his jaw set and his gaze colder than before. He scared people now, even those who loved him. He had become something sharper than a man, something the world would either fear or destroy. 3 months later, he escaped again, and again, and again. 13 times in total. Each attempt was different, planned with more precision than the last. He learned to run through swamps without leaving footprints. He learned which creeks carried sound and which swallowed it. He learned which trees bent just enough to hide a man and which cracked loudly under weight. Every failure made him smarter. Every punishment made him stronger. Every scar taught him something. But what made Samuel truly dangerous was not that he escaped 13 times. It was that he always came back. People whispered that he must be crazy, who would run from hell just to return, who would taste freedom just to step willingly into chains again. But the ones who really watched him knew better. Samuel wasn't running for himself. He wasn't coming back for himself. Every time he returned, he brought something with him. Knowledge, maps, secrets, routes that only the bravest dared travel, names of safe places, warnings of traps. Samuel had turned himself into a weapon. He had become the most dangerous man in Alabama because he knew everything. He had seen everything. He had walked through the entire landscape of escape routes like he owned them. And each time he returned, more slaves disappeared in the night. More families vanished. More children were found missing from their cabins at dawn. Samuel had become a ghost that walked both worlds. The first time he came back, he had only a small sliver of hope to offer, a whispered message from a free black family in Tennessee who were willing to hide runaways. The second time, he had a sketched map of a part of the woods no one had dared enter. The third time, he brought information about a patrol route that would be changing soon, creating a 2-hour window of freedom. And by the sixth time, he had become a legend. The plantation owners talked about him like a monster. The Graysons hired bounty hunters whose only job was to track him. They swore they would break him, bury him, or hang him, whichever ended his defiance fastest. But Samuel did not fear death. He feared dying without finishing what he had started. Every escape became a mission. Every mission became a story whispered in cabins, passed between trembling hands, hidden beneath floorboards. Samuel was not just escaping anymore. He was building a network, one body at a time, one message at a time, one midnight whisper at a time. And every time he returned, the punishment grew worse. They chained him by the wrists and ankles and left him in the sun. They tied him to posts and whipped him until they ran out of strength. They burned the soles of his feet so he could not run for weeks. They locked him in a shed without food for days. They did everything a man could think of to break another man. Nothing worked. What they didn't understand was simple. Samuel had already decided he was not a man who could be broken. He was not fighting for himself, so pain meant nothing. Bruises meant nothing. Scars were just reminders of battles he had survived. He carried each one like a prophecy. On his 9th return, even the enslaved people were afraid. They knew the overseers were planning something worse than anything they had done before. They tried to convince him not to come back next time. They told him to run north and never look back. They begged him. But Samuel's answer was the same. He was not running for himself. He was running for everyone who could not. By the 11th escape, the Underground Railroad had heard of him. Messengers were sent quietly. They asked if he was willing to work with them formally, to lead entire groups. But Samuel refused, not because he doubted them, but because he knew the Grayson plantation was bleeding people slowly because of him. If he left entirely, the punishments for those who remained would be unbearable. He needed to stay close. He needed to protect them. What made Samuel dangerous was not his strength, his courage, or his defiance. It was his purpose. He had turned his body into a shield for others. He had turned his suffering into a weapon. He had turned hope into something tangible. And then came the 13th escape, the one that would change everything, the one the entire South would whisper about for decades, the one that would carve Samuel's name into history. It began the same way all the others did, with a quiet night, a long breath, and a final look back at the cabins where children slept unaware that everything depended on him. But this time he wasn't running alone. He had 6 people with him, 2 mothers, 1 elderly man, a teenage boy, a girl barely 12, and a newborn child wrapped in cloth. The stakes were higher. The danger was greater. But Samuel had prepared for this moment for years, and Alabama was about to learn what true danger looked like.